I'm going to turn now to Gretchen Hyde. And Gretchen, you have quite a job. We started with some really great speakers that looked back at range and really brought us up to speed about how the vegetation has changed and how the ranching has changed. And then last night we really had some outlandish and very cool and very doable ideas on how we might start to reimagine the future. And I just can't even imagine two better speakers today to talk about the land and then livestock and producers. So thanks to the speakers today. I think we've had, I feel like we've raised some really good questions, and if we are at a point of realizing there is science to help direct us, maybe towards the future. But Gretchen, you have your finger on the pulse. Gretchen Hyde is, one of my very good friends. We both got our jobs in Idaho about the same time. Gretchen has a degree in accounting, so she really looks at the numbers behind things. But then in 1997, she switched tradition and went to, I guess, work on your passion, growing up on a ranch near Emmett and getting the chance to go back and work on rangelands as the executive director of the Idaho Rangeland Resource Commission. I hope that you'll start by telling us a bit more about that for those who don't know about the Rangeland Commission. And then also just really diving into how to help people understand rangelands, including a strong education program. So yes, you do work on the numbers and you do know about education, but you also have your ear to the ground. I think you hear from a lot of people about what they're seeing on range. So Gretchen, I'm going to pass it to you and see if you can't find some themes and bring it together for us.
Thanks, Karen. Wow, this is a huge task. I really appreciate the opportunity, and just a quick background. The Idaho Rangeland Resource Commission is a state agency that was set up in 1997 to do education and outreach. And so today we talked about plants and animals, and I'm going to bring it back to people, because in my feeling, it really is about the people. There's just so many complex issues, and if we don't get back to communication, it's going to be a challenge. And I think we've kind of heard that over and over. Even today's conversations are very complicated. There's a lot to it, and I guess it's just a little capsule of what it takes to become a rangeland manager. So I really appreciate both of you. And yeah, I always feel like I should be getting college credit for these kind of these conferences. So anyway, so I did write down some thoughts because my head was spinning last night, and really appreciate all the presentations. But I always think about the future of rangeland. That's kind of what my job is, and trying to think about how we position ourselves and keep going. Participating in conferences, symposiums, and tours kind of allows me to keep up to date with science without being a scientist, on the ground trends and management techniques. Seeing the big picture of the three-legged stool that Wendy Pratt referenced in her presentation, the ecological, economic, and social impacts on rangeland is really difficult. I think the ecological ends up being the easy part, and we have the other two, and we have to deal with people. Wendy also reminded us that every single ranch is different, which is really true, and there is no stereotypical ranch or rancher. I've met so many well-educated ranchers and farmers over my career, including a nuclear engineer who preferred working on the ranch, who totally think outside the box. And it's almost comical when I hear people think of farmers and ranchers as uneducated or stuck in their ways. Believe me, if that was the case, they would be extinct. One thing which has stood the test of time is also what Wendy referred to as following the green. This requires livestock to access public lands in most of Idaho. One of the similarities you can find throughout the West. One of the most, with most of rangeland, especially in the upper elevations, publicly managed, that is where the public understanding of rangelands and how they are managed becomes crucial. These are the same places where hikers, ATVers, hunters, campers, just outdoor enthusiasts enjoy their vacations and weekends. Dealing with livestock in their beloved camping and hunting places is not what they expect or want. And I do hear from them or hear about them often. Seth Pratt brought to our attention a recent article in the Mountain Journal, and I think you should take a look at this, how social media and bad behavior are leaving wild places trashed. And that came from this August. I can encourage you to read that, because I think it really kind of encapsulates some of the issues that we've had during this pandemic. Rather than going to Disneyland or other crowded destinations, people are choosing the outdoors, which is awesome, but it's also really created some challenges. This summer, several organizations joined together to develop a Recreate Responsibly Idaho campaign, and it focused mostly on COVID concerns, but in the future, I really think it needs to be continued and really deal with stewardship and etiquette of different users on rangeland. I think it's a great way to segue into the next challenges of our growing population. Another article that was on that same Mountain Journal website called How Some Outdoor Recreationists See Their Impact on Wildlife and Wild Places is also a good but very uncomfortable read. Many recreationists consider themselves advocates and environmentalists, just like ranchers do. As they advocate for more trails and dispersed use, what happens to the other users, livestock for instance, in this scenario? You know, we're going to be outnumbered greatly. Forever, we had more livestock than people, but that's going to change. And ranchers are outnumbered by recreationists already by far. This is where that urban-rural divide becomes obvious. Good rangeland grazing management encourages livestock dispersal to minimize impact, just like what they're asking for with the recreational use. This article, while it focused on the Yellowstone National Park, is really pertinent to surrounding areas and all over the West because of the increase in recreational use. This article also references private land in Montana and the desire to convert private property into public property. And I can tell you that is a war in the making. These are perspectives which make me extremely uncomfortable. But the reality is we need to listen, engage, and be prepared, or it's going to end up being a fight in the future. Ranching is difficult and requires adaptation every single year. When people bring up climate change to many ranchers, not all, the answer is yes, the climate changes. Many keep track of their weather on their own ranch, and then they reuse that data to learn from their mistakes usually. Dr. Shoemaker gave us a great example of this data and how we need to learn from the past. Understanding the uncontrollable fluctuations that impact the vegetation every year is hard for many people to grasp. I think that April and Mike did a great job this morning of talking about that. Monitoring photos are so helpful in understanding how subtle changes in precipitation amounts and timing impact rangeland plants each year. Transparency on this type of data and pictures are essential for people to understand these variations with their own eyes. Sharing these types of long-term monitoring photos, as well as the science behind them, is part of building that cultural understanding. This is not just for ranchers, not just for rangeland managers, or college students anymore. The interested public needs to be included. So last evening, Dr. Brunson's presentation on reimagining public grazing land management reinforced this need for transparency. Many people are out on the rangeland, many more people are now on the rangeland than ever before, and are bonding to areas that, you know, at one point, there's only a few people who ever even knew about. Collaborations and involving neutral parties in monitoring and decision-making is likely to increase in the future. His suggestions that a new bridging or boundary-spanning organizations are needed to assist with this involvement of diverse populations was an incredible next step. But this really scares a lot of people. Why do you think that is? Well, change is scary, and we all know that it's inevitable. But the future is going to mean changes in how the land looks and is managed. Encouragement of involvement in these types of groups and conversation is essential for a balanced approach to occur. Stakeholders are going to keep showing up at the BLM offices or the Forest Service offices and promoting their own perspectives, but will they represent you? Some of the solutions that came out of small group discussions, which I thought were incredible last night, involved institutionalizing innovation and collaboration into land management process. So I'm going to do a little perk, but groups like the Idaho Rangeland Conservation Partnership are poised to step up to this daunting task. This new organization was created with that expectation in mind, connecting the urban and rural interests as a boundary spanner, I really like that term, requires proactive leadership and vision. Diverse perspectives who can agree on a few things is way better than ending up in court on every single legal decision that's made on public land. This is not an easy task and will take much patience and endurance to achieve. Another solution that was brought up last night was communication. And this is where I kind of feel stressed because I know that there's so much that needs to be done. The Idaho Rangeland Resource Commission was created nearly 25 years ago with this goal in mind. While the IRC has made many great strides, there is still so much to do and the needs are growing. More importantly, we cannot do it alone. This conference is just a small piece of the communication. New technologies like podcasts, what Karen just recommended, and others are ways that we can reach out. I'd recommend Millennial Ag, and another one that kind of came to my attention this week is called Grouse. And it's very interesting. It's a different perspective and it's, once again, a little bit uncomfortable. Since this is what I work on, my solution is always about education. The assumptions and diverse expectations from different user groups will always be a challenge. But having the interested public understand what rangeland is, whether you call it deserts, foothills, sagebrush, grasslands, is the first step. April Hewlett and I spoke to over 500 fourth graders last week in Rigby, very rural area surrounded by rangeland. These events are exhilarating, but also exhausting. I really appreciate her assistance on that. I would guess that less than 5% of the kids knew what the word rangeland meant, even though that's where they live. And the opposite was true. Basically, 95% of the kids could easily describe what a forest was. So we really need to get on the same language. I think all these different terms are really confusing and people don't know what we're even talking about. We need to listen to the public expectations and become engaged in hard conversations. This will take concerted leadership to break down the silos and build courage to stand against those who threaten to ruin it for the rest. And I'm talking about people who are littering and destructive behaviors. Everyone who cares about the land has something to offer to this conversation. Fragmented conversations lead to fragmented land, and we all need to be stewards of the land and come together to find solutions to these complicated challenges.
Wow, that is something to end on. Fragmented conversations lead to fragmented land. Wow, you hit it. Gretchen, you are super insightful, but really articulate, and I think you've given us some amazing challenges, but wow, you really stepped to the plate. Those were really amazing points. I want to point out just one thing, that you're a member of the Rangeland Center Partners Advisory Council, and that's the group that tries to keep the Rangeland Center adding the science to the solutions on the range. And we started this presentation with Wendy Pratt. She's also on our PAC. And both of you have termed out after 6 great years of working with us. You'll be off the PAC, and I can't believe that how much you've brought to us, how much we've changed in these years. And thanks to you and Wendy, for being part of that. And if you saw the video from Tim Murphy, he talked about what the PAC does. I just want to end now by saying thanks to all of you who came. Eric, thank you for leading the organization, the group that kind of put this together, and that included Mike Kuiper, Glenn Shoemaker, Joe Sager, Carmen Wilmore, Crystal Callahan, and Catherine Himes. But Eric, you were the one that kind of kept us, the glue between us. If you want to know more about the Rangeland Center, go to rangelandcenter.org. That's where you'll find that fact sheet. Try to listen to the Art of Range podcast. That's also great. And then I'm happy to say that several of the tips were from the Great Basin Fire Science Exchange, and their website is greatbasinfirescience.org. So there was a lot of other good information in the Q&A, and I think we brought more questions than we answered, and I think that's okay. So thanks again for joining the Fall Forum. Let's hope next year we're back live, but we're going to try to continue these conversations. So thanks to all of you. Please do fill out the survey at the end of this and tell us what more things you'd like to learn about. Thanks so much to the great speakers. Have a great weekend to all of you. Go out and enjoy some range. So thank you and have a good weekend.